Imagine standing in a living room where the clock ticks louder than your heartbeat. Every phone call feels like a warning. Every letter feels like goodbye. And every sunrise is a reminder that your loved one might not see another one. This is not the life of a condemned inmate. This is the life of the families left behind. Families trapped in a world where hope, fear, and time itself twist together into a kind of emotional purgatory. This documentary pulls back the curtain on a reality rarely discussed: the psychological burden carried by the mothers, fathers, siblings, and children of people on death row. Their stories are real. The pain is real. And so is the fight to hold on to humanity in a system built on waiting. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. For more deep research of prison documentary like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The experience of families tied to death row is invisible to most of society. They are neither incarcerated nor free. They move through everyday life with the weight of a sentence they did not receive, yet feel every single day. While cases grab headlines, families stand in the shadows, caught between loyalty, stigma, fear, and a justice system that rarely acknowledges their existence. One of the clearest examples comes from the story of Anthony Ray Hinton, wrongfully convicted in Alabama and placed on death row for nearly 3 decades. His mother lived with a specific, indescribable terror, knowing her son was locked inside a place designed to end lives. Family members like her describe living in 2 worlds at once, folding laundry, attending church, cooking dinner, while constantly fearing that a mistake in a courtroom could take their child forever. Even when Hinton was proven innocent and released, psychologists documented the lasting marks carried by his family: chronic anxiety, long-term stress symptoms, and the emotional whiplash of fighting for someone who cannot physically fight alongside you. Families in these situations often experience something criminologists refer to as anticipatory grief. Unlike normal grief, which follows loss, anticipatory grief forces a person to mourn someone who is still alive. Mothers like Hinton's, siblings like those of Julius Jones, and children like the sons and daughters of many incarcerated parents experience waves of dread that arrive suddenly, unpredictably, and repeatedly. It is grief without closure, fear without end, and hope without guarantee. For some families, the psychological pressure becomes a daily ritual. Consider Kris Maharaj, a British businessman sentenced to death in Florida in the 1980s. His wife, Marita, became his most powerful advocate. Every morning, she woke up with purpose: find evidence, talk to lawyers, write letters. But behind that determination was exhaustion, years of living under the shadow of a sentence she did not earn. Legal experts who met with her described a woman burning with hope yet drained by time, the kind of emotional duality that defines death row families. She never experienced a crime scene, never saw a prison yard, but she lived with a conviction just the same, because the person she loved was swallowed by the system. The emotional toll on children is even more devastating. Research from criminal justice experts shows that the child of a death row inmate often carries stigma, confusion, and fear far beyond childhood. Some grow up feeling responsible, others feel abandoned, many feel angry at a system they can't fully understand. The children of people like Sabrina Butler, who was wrongfully convicted in Mississippi, faced this emotional chaos long before she was exonerated. During her time on death row, her family described living in a fog, isolated by the label death row family, pressured by the public eye, and terrified of the permanent separation that could arrive at any moment. After her release, she spoke openly about how the experience reshaped her family's emotional world. For them, freedom didn't erase the years of fear, it only proved how much they had lost. The psychological burden is not limited to fear. Many families describe a long-term identity shift. They go from being ordinary relatives to becoming advocates, investigators, researchers, amateur lawyers, roles they never expected to play. The mother of Rodney Reed, whose case in Texas drew national attention, became a symbol of this transformation. Year after year, she attended hearings, gathered documents, spoke to reporters, and stood in crowds holding signs with her son's name. Her life revolved around something she never asked for: trying to convince the world that her son deserved a real chance at justice. Experts say this form of advocacy identity becomes a coping mechanism, something that allows families to turn fear into action, even if they cannot change the final outcome. There is also the matter of stigma. Families often face discrimination, judgment, and social isolation. Neighbors whisper. Churches distance themselves. Schools become hostile environments for children connected to high-profile cases. For the family of Clarence Brandley, a Texas man wrongfully convicted in the 1980s, the stigma was crushing. Reports from the era describe how his relatives endured harassment and community pressure simply for standing by him. Society often treats families as extensions of the crime, even when the crime itself is disputed or the conviction is later overturned. Psychologists have found that this stigma can lead to long-term trauma, including depression, anxiety, and withdrawal from social life. And this is where the real emotional paradox begins. Families love the person on death row, but loving them means stepping into a world built around controlled visitation rooms, strict rules, and sterile conversations. Imagine hugging your son through layers of steel and glass. Imagine celebrating a birthday in a visitation booth. Imagine hearing the words, "Your time is up," when you're in the middle of saying, "I love you." For the families of inmates like Julius Jones, whose case sparked intense national debate, visiting became a ritual of heartbreak and hope. They walked through metal detectors, signed in under watchful eyes, sat across from him, and tried to pretend that the visit was normal. It wasn't. It could never be. But they held on to every second. Criminologists describe this as forced resilience. Families must be strong even when their hearts are crumbling. They must hold on to hope even when the legal system offers none. They live in a pressure cooker where every appeal, every hearing, every news headline becomes an emotional roller coaster. Legal complications add another layer. Death row cases are often slow, complex, and unpredictable. Some families spend years waiting for a single court decision. Others endure multiple execution dates, each one forcing them to confront the possibility of irreversible loss. Public records show that several families tied to high-profile cases have gone through this cycle multiple times, each date tearing open emotional wounds all over again. Even when a case is stayed or a sentence is commuted, the aftermath leaves families feeling shaken, exhausted, and afraid to trust good news. Yet amid all this pain, there is something else. The fight for truth. Families become the heartbeat of many wrongful conviction efforts. They gather documents, contact journalists, speak at rallies, and push experts to review old evidence. The Innocence Project and similar organizations have repeatedly stated that family persistence is often the reason cases receive new attention. That persistence is fueled by love, but also by desperation. One example stands out. The family of Anthony Ray Hinton never gave up. They stood by him through every appeal, every disappointment, every year of isolation. When he was finally released, his family embraced him with a mixture of joy and bewilderment. Their loved one had returned, but time had carved a permanent mark. Psychologists note that reunification after decades of wrongful imprisonment is emotionally complicated. Families celebrate, but they must also relearn each other, rebuild trust, and recover from years of anticipatory grief. Even in cases where guilt is not disputed, families experience a different form of psychological burden, reconciling love with accountability. Some relatives acknowledge the harm caused but still love the person behind bars. The emotional conflict between moral responsibility and familial loyalty is one of the most complex aspects of death row psychology. Families may carry shame, guilt, or confusion, emotions rarely discussed in public but deeply felt in private. There is also the matter of time. Time behaves differently for death row families. Days feel long, years feel short, and life becomes divided into legal phases: pretrial, conviction, appeals, stays, hearings, decisions. Some families describe birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries as emotional landmines, reminders of what has been lost. Others cling to them as small victories of togetherness, even if togetherness comes through a pane of glass. Despite all this, families continue to fight, because the alternative is to give up, And most say they simply cannot do that. Their loved ones depend on them emotionally, legally, spiritually. In interviews, many death row inmates say their greatest fear is not isolation or confinement. It is the idea that their family might stop visiting. In that sense, families carry a responsibility heavier than any sentence, the responsibility of hope. When experts study the psychological burden of death row families, they often describe a cycle of emotional states: shock, denial, fear, determination, fatigue, resilience, and sometimes hope. This cycle can repeat for years. It shapes personalities, relationships, and futures. But there is also strength here, strength forged in the fire of uncertainty. The mother who attends every hearing, the sibling who becomes a researcher, the child who grows into an advocate, the spouse who keeps writing letters even when answers come late. Their stories reveal something profound about humanity. Love does not disappear under pressure. It bends, it reshapes, it adapts, but it holds. This documentary is not about guilt or innocence. It is about the people who wait, the people who endure, the people whose lives are shaped by a system they do not control. Their pain is real. Their courage is real. And so is the message their stories carry. As we close, ask yourself this. What does it do to a person to live every day waiting for a phone call that could change their life forever? What does it do to a family to love someone the world has condemned? And what does it say about us when we forget the people who stand outside the prison gates, holding hope in one hand and fear in the other? This is the psychological burden of death row families. A burden built on waiting. A burden built on love. A burden the world rarely sees. If you believe their stories matter, if you believe their voices deserve to be heard, then stay engaged. Stay informed. Because understanding their struggle brings us one step closer to understanding the true cost of justice. Thank you for watching. And if you want more documentaries like this, stories that reveal the human truth behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe. Your support amplifies the voices that are too often forgotten.